The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the third time. Her hands, steady despite the cold mountain air, moved with the precision of someone who had done this thousands of times before. Around her, other recruits whispered and pointed, their conversations carrying on the wind like unwanted background noise. "Look at her trying so hard," sneered Marcus Thompson, a tall recruit from Texas who seemed to think his father's military background gave him special privileges. "Does she really think she belongs here with the real soldiers?" Sarah didn't turn around, but her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard these comments every day for the past 6 weeks since arriving at the elite Special Operations Training Center. The whispers followed her everywhere, to the mess hall, during physical training, even to the shooting range where she consistently outperformed most of her peers. "My money says she washes out before month 2, another voice chimed in. This belonged to Kevin Walsh, whose Boston accent made his disdain sound even sharper. "This isn't some weekend paintball game. This is serious business." The training facility sat nestled in the Rocky Mountains, a place where the military sent only its most promising candidates for advanced sniper training. Getting here was an achievement in itself, but staying required something else entirely. The dropout rate hovered around 70%, and everyone knew it. Sarah had grown up in a small town in New Mexico, where her father worked as a mechanic and her mother taught at the local elementary school. Neither parent had military experience, and when Sarah announced her intention to join the Army after high school, they had been supportive but worried. Her younger brother Miguel had called her crazy, saying she was too small and too quiet to make it in the military. But Sarah had always been different. While other kids played video games or watched television, she spent hours in the desert behind her house, practicing with her grandfather's old hunting rifle. Her grandfather, a quiet man who rarely spoke about his time in Vietnam, had taught her the basics before he passed away when she was 15. The rifle had become her inheritance, along with a deep respect for precision and patience. The journey to this training facility had not been easy. After basic training, where she had excelled despite the doubts of her drill instructors, Sarah had applied for sniper school. The application process alone had taken months, involving psychological evaluations, physical fitness tests that pushed her to her limits, and interviews that seemed designed to break down her confidence. During one particularly difficult interview, a gruff colonel had looked at her personnel file and shaken his head. "Martinez, you're 5'4" and weigh maybe 120 soaking wet. You come from a family with no military background. What makes you think you have what it takes to be a sniper?" Sarah had looked him straight in the eye and responded, "Because I can make shots that others can't, sir. Size doesn't pull the trigger. Training and determination do." Now, standing on this range with the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her shoulders, she wondered if her confidence had been misplaced. The training was brutal, designed to push candidates beyond their physical and mental limits. Days started at 4 in the morning with a 5-mile run in full gear, followed by hours of classroom instruction on ballistics, weather patterns, and tactical planning. The other recruits had quickly formed their own social groups, united by shared backgrounds or similar experiences. Most came from military families or had prior combat experience. They spoke a language of inside jokes and shared references that Sarah couldn't understand, making her feel like an outsider looking in. "All right, listen up," shouted Instructor Sergeant Williams, his voice cutting through the morning chatter like a knife. Williams was a veteran sniper with 3 tours in Afghanistan under his belt and a reputation for being absolutely merciless in his training methods. "Today we're running the 1,000-meter challenge. You'll have 1 shot, and the target is no bigger than a dinner plate. Miss, and you're running extra laps tonight." The recruits lined up behind the firing line, each taking their assigned position. Sarah found herself between Marcus and another recruit named Jennifer Cole, one of only 3 women in the program. Jennifer had been friendly enough, but even she seemed to keep her distance, perhaps worried that association with Sarah might hurt her own standing. As they waited for their turn, Marcus continued his running commentary. "I heard she's never even been in combat," he said, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "At least the rest of us have some real experience to draw from." This wasn't entirely true, though Sarah had never corrected the assumption. She had completed one deployment to Afghanistan, though as a member of a support unit rather than a combat role. The experience had been valuable, but she knew it didn't carry the same weight as the infantry experience most of her peers possessed. The first few recruits took their shots with mixed results. The mountain wind was tricky, shifting direction every few minutes, and requiring constant adjustments. 2 recruits missed their targets completely, earning disappointed shakes of the head from Sergeant Williams. When Jennifer's turn came, she settled into position with obvious skill. Her shot rang out across the range, and, after a moment, the spotter called out, "Hit, center mass." The small group of recruits offered polite applause, and Jennifer smiled with obvious relief. Marcus stepped up next, taking his time to adjust his position and check his calculations. His shot was good, landing just slightly off-center but still well within the target zone. He stood up with a satisfied grin, accepting congratulations from his friends. Then, it was Sarah's turn. She moved into position with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything else. The rifle felt comfortable in her hands, an extension of her own body rather than a separate tool. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the wind on her face and listening to its subtle changes. The target seemed impossibly small through the scope, a tiny circle of white against the brown hillside. At this distance, even the slightest miscalculation would result in a complete miss. Sarah controlled her breathing, letting her heart rate slow as she had been taught. Behind her, she could hear Marcus making another comment about beginner's luck, and someone else chuckling in response. The words faded into background noise as Sarah focused entirely on the shot ahead of her. She squeezed the trigger slowly, steadily, the way her grandfather had taught her all those years ago in the New Mexico desert. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and, for a moment, the only sound was the echo of the gunshot rolling across the mountains. "Hit," called the spotter after what seemed like an eternity. Then, after a pause, "Dead center." A murmur ran through the group of observers. Dead center hits at 1,000 meters were rare, even among experienced snipers. Sarah stood up slowly, trying not to show the relief flooding through her system. "Nice shot, Martinez," Sergeant Williams said, his tone neutral but his eyes showing a flicker of interest. It was the first time he had addressed her by name rather than simply barking orders. As the group prepared to move on to the next exercise, Sarah overheard Marcus talking to Kevin in low voices. "Probably just luck," Marcus was saying. "Let's see how she does when the pressure is really on." Kevin nodded in agreement. "This stuff is easy compared to what's coming. Wait until we get to the real training scenarios." Sarah pretended not to hear them, but their words stung more than she cared to admit. She had worked harder than anyone else to get here, sacrificing social life and personal relationships to focus entirely on her military career. Every success was dismissed as luck, every achievement minimized as an exception rather than the rule. That evening, after dinner in the mess hall where she sat alone as usual, Sarah found herself on the phone with her mother. The conversation was difficult, conducted in hushed tones from a payphone near the barracks. "Mija, you sound tired," her mother said, concern evident in her voice. "Are you eating enough? Getting enough sleep?" "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "The training is just intense. Everyone here has been doing this their whole lives." "That doesn't mean you don't belong there," her mother said firmly. "You earned your place just like everyone else. Don't let anyone make you feel differently." After hanging up, Sarah walked back to the barracks where most of the other recruits were gathered around a television, watching a movie and sharing stories from their previous assignments. She went to her own bunk and pulled out a notebook where she kept detailed records of her training progress. The numbers didn't lie. Her shooting scores were consistently in the top 10%. Her physical fitness times were improving every week. Her written test scores were among the highest in the class. But none of that seemed to matter to her fellow recruits, who continued to treat her like an outsider who didn't belong. As she lay in her bunk that night, listening to the quiet conversations of the other recruits, Sarah made a decision. She would stop trying to prove herself to people who had already made up their minds about her. Instead, she would focus entirely on the training itself, on becoming the best sniper she could possibly be. The next morning brought new challenges, as Sergeant Williams announced they would begin urban warfare simulations. These exercises were designed to test not just shooting accuracy, but also tactical thinking and the ability to work under extreme pressure. You'll be working in teams, Williams explained as the recruits gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. Each team will have a designated sniper and a spotter. Your mission will be to eliminate specific targets while avoiding civilian casualties and evading enemy detection. Sarah found herself partnered with David Kim, a quiet recruit from California who had barely spoken to her during their time at the facility. David had been a Marine before applying for sniper training, and his experience showed in his methodical approach to every task. "Look," David said as they prepared their equipment, "I don't care about all the drama with the other guys. I just want to complete this mission successfully. Can you handle your part?" Sarah nodded, appreciating his straightforward approach. "I can handle it." Their assigned position was the roof of a mock building overlooking a simulated town square. The exercise would involve live role players acting as civilians, with targets marked by special indicators that only trained snipers could identify through their scopes. As they climbed into position in the early morning light, Sarah could see other teams taking their places throughout the mock urban environment. The complexity of the exercise was immediately apparent. This wasn't just about making accurate shots, but about making the right shots at the right time while avoiding collateral damage. David set up his spotting scope and began calling out observations. Multiple civilians in the square. Target 1 appears to be the man in the blue jacket near the fountain. Target 2 is, wait, I need a better angle. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, scanning the area through her rifle scope. The mock town was incredibly realistic, complete with civilians going about their daily routines and potential threats hidden among them. Making the wrong choice could result in immediate failure. "I have target 1, Sarah said quietly. "Clear shot. No civilians in the background." "Hold," David responded. "Target 2 is moving toward a group of children. We need to wait for a cleaner opportunity." This was the kind of decision-making that separated good snipers from great ones. The pressure to take any available shot was enormous, especially with instructors watching and evaluating every move. But patience and precision were more important than speed. They waited, watching as the scenario played out below them. Other teams were already engaging their targets, the sound of gunfire echoing through the mock town. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but forced herself to remain calm and focused. "Target 2 is clear," David finally announced. "You have a clean shot." Sarah's second shot was as precise as her first, and both targets went down exactly as planned. Around them, she could hear the sounds of other teams completing their missions with varying degrees of success. As they packed up their equipment, David looked at her with something approaching respect. "Good shooting," he said simply. "You stayed calm under pressure." It was a small acknowledgement, but it meant more to Sarah than all the criticism from the other recruits. She was beginning to realize that earning respect in this environment wouldn't come from trying to fit in with the group, but from consistently performing at the highest level possible. The weeks that followed brought increasingly difficult challenges. Night shooting exercises tested their ability to operate in complete darkness. Long-range shots at distances exceeding 1,500 meters pushed their equipment and skills to the limit. Combat scenarios that required them to engage multiple targets while under simulated enemy fire tested their ability to think clearly under extreme stress. Through it all, Sarah continued to excel, though the recognition came slowly and grudgingly. Sergeant Williams began using her shots as examples for the rest of the class, though he never praised her directly. Other instructors started paying attention to her technique, asking questions about her training background and methods. But the social isolation continued. Marcus and his group of friends maintained their skeptical attitude, treating each of Sarah's successes as anomalies rather than evidence of genuine skill. During breaks between exercises, conversations would stop when she approached, resuming in hushed tones after she passed by. The breaking point came during a particularly challenging exercise in the final weeks of the program. The scenario involved a hostage situation where precision shooting was critical to avoiding civilian casualties. Each recruit would face the scenario individually, with their performance being evaluated by a panel of instructors and visiting observers. As Sarah waited for her turn, she overheard Marcus talking to several other recruits about her upcoming performance. $20 says she cracks under the real pressure, he was saying. This isn't some practice range. This is the kind of shot that separates the pretenders from the real deal. Others nodded in agreement, their confidence in her failure evident in their expressions. Sarah realized that no amount of previous success would change their minds. They were committed to seeing her as an outsider who didn't belong, regardless of the evidence to the contrary. When her turn came, Sarah approached the exercise with a calm determination that surprised even herself. The scenario was indeed challenging, requiring her to make a precise shot through a narrow window while a role-playing hostage-taker held a civilian at gunpoint. The margin for error was essentially zero. She took her time setting up, checking, and rechecking her calculations. The wind was gusty, requiring constant adjustments. The target was partially obscured, making identification difficult. Every aspect of the exercise was designed to induce stress and force mistakes. But, as Sarah looked through her scope, something clicked into place. All the months of training, all the practice sessions, all the criticism and doubt faded away. There was only the target, the rifle, and the shot that needed to be made. The bullet flew true, striking exactly where it needed to strike. The hostage scenario ended successfully, with the civilian unharmed and the threat eliminated. A moment of silence followed, broken only by the sound of wind through the training facility. "Exceptional work," Martinez called out one of the visiting observers, a colonel whose opinion carried significant weight. That was a textbook example of precision shooting under pressure. As Sarah walked away from the exercise, she could see the expressions on the faces of her fellow recruits. Some looked surprised, others impressed, and a few, including Marcus, looked frustrated that their predictions had been proven wrong once again. But Sarah no longer cared about their approval or disapproval. She had proven something more important to herself, that she belonged in this elite program not because of luck or chance, but because of skill, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The doubts that had plagued her for months were finally beginning to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence in her abilities and her place in the military. 2 years after completing sniper training, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez found herself in a very different world. The graduation ceremony had been a quiet affair, with only family and close friends in attendance. Her parents had driven up from New Mexico, their pride evident despite their limited understanding of what she had accomplished. Miguel, now a sophomore in college, had shaken his head in amazement at his sister's transformation from the quiet girl who used to disappear into the desert for hours. The assignment that followed graduation had taken her to Fort Bragg, where she joined the 82nd Airborne Division as part of a specialized reconnaissance unit. The work was challenging and often dangerous, involving intelligence gathering in hostile territories and providing overwatch for special operations teams. It was exactly the kind of assignment she had dreamed about during those difficult months of training. Her reputation within the unit grew steadily. Captain Reynolds, her commanding officer, was a fair man who evaluated his soldiers based on performance rather than preconceptions. Under his leadership, Sarah found herself taking on increasingly important assignments, often working alone or with minimal support in situations where precision and reliability were paramount. The team she worked with was small, but highly skilled. There was Sergeant First Class Mike Torres, a communications specialist from Texas who had a gift for staying calm under pressure. Corporal Amanda Walsh handled explosives and demolitions with an expertise that made everyone else nervous, while Specialist Robert Chun managed intelligence gathering and analysis with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Unlike her experience in sniper school, Sarah found acceptance among this group relatively quickly. They were professionals who cared more about competence than social dynamics, and her consistent performance earned their respect in ways that felt genuine rather than grudging. Martinez, Captain Reynolds had said during one of their regular briefings, "Your accuracy rating over the past 6 months is the highest in division history. I'm putting you in for advanced training with the Special Operations Command." The recommendation came as a surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Sarah's performance records spoke for themselves. Successful completion of every assigned mission, 0 civilian casualties, and a shot accuracy rating that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. But the world of special operations was different from regular Army assignments. involving risks and responsibilities that few soldiers ever faced. The advanced sniper course at the Special Operations Training Center was even more demanding than her original training. The candidates were drawn from elite units across all branches of the military, representing the absolute best marksmen and women the armed forces had to offer. The dropout rate was higher, the standards more stringent, and the psychological pressure more intense. Sarah arrived at the training facility on a cold morning in February, carrying the same rifle that had served her so well during her previous assignments. The weapon had become an extension of herself, customized and modified based on years of experience and hundreds of successful missions. The other candidates were impressive in ways that made her original training class look amateur by comparison. There was Master Sergeant David Liu, a Marine sniper with 4 deployments, and a Silver Star for Valor. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Volkov, an Air Force Special Tactics operator who had completed missions in 12 different countries. Sergeant First Class Carlos Mendez, an Army Ranger whose reputation preceded him even in elite circles. But there was also something familiar about the dynamic, the same subtle exclusion, the same quiet questions about whether she truly belonged among such accomplished operators. The difference was that these doubts came from people whose opinions actually mattered, people whose expertise was unquestionable. During the first week of training, the candidates faced a series of evaluations designed to test not just their shooting skills, but their ability to function under extreme stress. One exercise involved making precision shots while under simulated artillery fire, with explosions and debris creating chaos around their shooting positions. The enemy isn't going to wait for perfect conditions, explained Master Sergeant Patricia Coleman, the lead instructor whose own legend in special operations was well established. You need to be able to perform when everything around you is falling apart. Sarah's performance during this exercise was flawless, her shots finding their targets despite the chaos erupting around her. But she noticed the way some of the other candidates exchanged glances, as if her success was somehow suspicious or undeserved. The whispered conversations were more sophisticated than what she had experienced in basic sniper training, but the underlying message was similar. "She's good," she heard Master Sergeant Liu saying to another candidate. "But this is different from regular Army work. Special operations requires a different kind of person." The implication was clear, that technical skill alone wasn't sufficient for this level of work, that there were intangible qualities that Sarah might lack. These qualities were never explicitly defined, but they seemed to involve a certain background, a certain type of experience, a certain way of fitting into the exclusive culture of elite military units. Sarah's response was the same as it had always been, to focus entirely on the work itself and let her performance speak for her qualifications. She studied harder than anyone else, spending hours analyzing weather patterns and ballistics calculations while others socialized or relaxed. She volunteered for the most difficult assignments and requested additional training in areas where she felt less confident. The breakthrough came during a complex urban warfare exercise that took place in a mock city built specifically for training purposes. The scenario involved multiple hostile forces, civilian populations, and time-sensitive objectives that required split-second decision-making under extreme pressure. Sarah found herself assigned to provide overwatch for a team attempting to extract a high-value target from a building surrounded by enemy forces. Her position was on a rooftop 800 meters away, with multiple obstacles and potential civilian casualties complicating every shot. The mission began smoothly, but quickly deteriorated as enemy forces proved more numerous and better organized than intelligence had suggested. The extraction team found themselves pinned down in the target building, with their planned exit routes blocked by hostile fire. "Overlook, this is ground team," crackled the voice in Sarah's earpiece. "We need immediate suppression of enemy positions on the south side of the target building. Multiple hostiles with heavy weapons." Sarah scanned the area through her scope, identifying 3 separate positions where enemy role players were directing fire toward the extraction team. The shots were challenging, long range, multiple targets, and the constant risk of hitting friendly forces who were moving through the same area. Her first shot eliminated a machine gun position that had been particularly troublesome for the ground team. The second took out a sniper who had been targeting the extraction team's medic. The third required her to wait nearly 10 minutes for a clear shot, but when it came, it removed the final obstacle to the team's successful extraction. Outstanding work. Overlook, came the voice of the team leader as they reached their extraction point safely. Your support made all the difference. What Sarah didn't know was that the exercise had been observed by a group of senior officers who were evaluating candidates for an even more exclusive program. Among them was Colonel James Harrison, a Special Forces officer whose own reputation was legendary within elite military circles. After the exercise, Colonel Harrison approached Sarah as she was cleaning her rifle. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he said, his tone serious but not unfriendly. "I've been watching your performance throughout this training cycle. Your technical skills are exceptional, but more importantly, you demonstrate the kind of operational judgment that can't be taught." Sarah looked up from her rifle, unsure how to respond. Praise from someone at Colonel Harrison's level was unprecedented in her experience. "I'd like to discuss an opportunity with you," Harrison continued. "There's a program that might interest you, though I should warn you that it makes this training look like basic target practice." The program Harrison described was classified at levels that required additional security clearances and background investigations. It involved working with joint task forces on missions that crossed traditional military boundaries, often in cooperation with intelligence agencies and foreign military units. "The work is dangerous," Harrison explained during their private meeting the next day. "The training is more demanding than anything you've experienced. And the psychological pressure is unlike anything in conventional military service. Most people who attempt this program don't complete it." Sarah listened carefully as he outlined the requirements and expectations. The training would take place at multiple facilities, some of them classified locations that didn't appear on any public maps. The candidates would be expected to master not just advanced shooting techniques, but also intelligence gathering, language skills, and cultural adaptation. "Why me?" Sarah asked finally. "There are other candidates here with more experience and better reputations." Harrison smiled slightly. "Because reputation and experience aren't always the same thing as capability. I've seen your files, Martinez. Every mission successful, every objective achieved, zero mistakes under pressure. That kind of consistency is rare, even among elite operators." The offer represented everything Sarah had worked toward since joining the military, but it also meant leaving behind the small amount of social acceptance she had finally achieved with her current unit. Starting over again in an even more exclusive environment, facing even higher levels of scrutiny and doubt. "I need time to think about it," she said. Harrison nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. The next training cycle starts in 6 weeks, and there are only 4 positions available." That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the opportunity, though she couldn't share most of the details due to security restrictions. Her mother was supportive but worried, understanding that advancement in Sarah's career usually meant more dangerous assignments in more remote locations. "Mija, you've already proven yourself more than most people ever will," her mother said. "You don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard." But Sarah knew that wasn't true. Each level of success only revealed new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. The alternative was to accept a comfortable but limited role in conventional military service, always wondering what she might have achieved if she had been willing to take greater risks. Her decision was made easier by an incident that occurred during the final week of advanced training. A group of candidates, including Master Sergeant Liu, were discussing the upcoming assignments and the various opportunities available to graduates of the program. "The really elite units are different," Liu was explaining to a younger candidate. "It's not just about shooting straight. It's about understanding the culture, fitting in with people who have been doing this kind of work their whole lives. Some people just don't have the right background for that level of responsibility." The comment wasn't directed at Sarah specifically, but the implication was clear. Despite her consistent performance and proven abilities, there would always be those who questioned whether she truly belonged at the highest levels of military service. Sarah made her decision that night, calling Colonel Harrison to accept his offer. The conversation was brief and professional, but she could hear satisfaction in his voice as he outlined the next steps in the process. "Welcome to a very exclusive club, Martinez," he said. "I think you're going to find the work more challenging and more rewarding than anything you've done before. The final exercise of advanced sniper training was designed as a culmination of everything they had learned, involving multiple objectives across a large training area with weather conditions that made every shot difficult. Sarah approached the exercise with the same methodical preparation that had served her throughout her career, but with an additional sense of confidence that came from knowing her future was already secured. Her performance was flawless, as had become her standard. Every target eliminated, every objective achieved, every decision made with the kind of precision that separated exceptional operators from merely good ones. When the exercise concluded and the final scores were announced, Sarah's name was at the top of the list by a significant margin. The graduation ceremony was more formal than her previous training completion, with senior officers from multiple branches of the military in attendance. As Sarah received her certificate and advanced qualification designation, she noticed several of her fellow graduates watching with expressions that mixed respect with lingering uncertainty. Master Sergeant Liu approached her after the ceremony, his manner more respectful than it had been during training. "Congratulations, Martinez," he said. "I hear you're moving on to something even more challenging." "That's impressive." Sarah thanked him politely, but she could still hear the undertone of surprise in his voice, as if her success remained somehow unexpected despite months of consistent evidence. She realized that no amount of achievement would completely eliminate the doubts of those who had made up their minds about her capabilities based on factors other than performance. But those doubts no longer mattered in the way they once had. Sarah had earned her place in the most elite levels of military service through skill, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The opinions of those who couldn't recognize that were irrelevant to her future success. As she packed her belongings and prepared for the next phase of her career, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet girl from New Mexico who had once spent hours alone in the desert practicing with her grandfather's rifle had become one of the most skilled marksmen in the entire military. The path ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges and new doubts from those who couldn't imagine that someone with her background could excel at the highest levels of military service. But Sarah was ready for those challenges, armed with the knowledge that she had already overcome obstacles that most people never even attempted to face. The specialized training that Colonel Harrison had described would begin in a month, at a facility whose location she wouldn't learn until the day before departure. The candidates would come from every branch of the military and several allied nations, representing the absolute pinnacle of special operations capability. For the first time in her career, Sarah was genuinely excited about the prospect of proving herself all over again. Each new level of challenge had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed, and she was curious to discover what she might achieve when pushed to her absolute limits. The doubters and skeptics would always be there, their opinions shaped by preconceptions that had nothing to do with actual performance. But Sarah had learned that their approval was not necessary for her success, and their disapproval could not diminish her achievements. She was ready for whatever came next. The classified training facility existed on no public maps and had no official designation beyond a series of numbers and letters that appeared in highly restricted government databases. Sarah arrived there on a cold morning in November, traveling in an unmarked vehicle with windows tinted so dark that she couldn't see the surrounding landscape during the 2-hour drive from the nearest airport. The facility itself was smaller than she had expected, but clearly designed for purposes far beyond conventional military training. The buildings were low and nondescript, blending into the mountainous terrain in ways that suggested serious attention to concealment and security. Armed guards at multiple checkpoints verified her identity using methods more sophisticated than anything she had previously encountered. Colonel Harrison met her at the final checkpoint, his greeting professional but warm. "Welcome to the program, Martinez. I hope you're ready for something completely different from anything you've experienced." The orientation briefing took place in a windowless conference room with a dozen other candidates, representing what Harrison described as the most exclusive military training program in existence. Sarah recognized some faces from previous assignments and training courses, but several candidates appeared to be from units she couldn't identify. For the next 8 months, Harrison began. You will undergo training designed to prepare you for missions that require capabilities far beyond conventional special operations. You will learn techniques that are classified at the highest levels of government, and you will be expected to demonstrate not just technical proficiency, but psychological resilience under conditions that would break most people. The training schedule he outlined was unlike anything Sarah had previously encountered. Days would begin at 3 in the morning and often extend past midnight, involving not just physical training and shooting exercises but also instruction in psychology, linguistics, cultural analysis, and what Harrison termed operational flexibility. The enemies you will face in real missions won't follow conventional rules of engagement, he explained. They will use every psychological and tactical advantage available to them, and you must be prepared to respond with capabilities they cannot anticipate or counter. Sarah's roommate for the duration of training was Captain Elena Kozlov, a Russian Special Forces officer participating in the program through an exchange agreement between allied nations. Elena's English was excellent, and her shooting skills were immediately apparent during their first range session together. In Russia, we have saying, Elena told Sarah during their second week of training. The wolf that survives winter is not strongest wolf, but smartest wolf. I think this applies to what we do here. The wisdom of that observation became apparent as the training progressed. Physical strength and shooting accuracy were merely baseline requirements for the program. The real challenges involved psychological conditioning designed to prepare candidates for missions where traditional military support would be unavailable and failure could result in international incidents. One exercise involved spending 5 days alone in wilderness conditions with minimal equipment, then infiltrating a mock enemy compound while being actively hunted by highly trained opposition forces. Another required gathering intelligence from role-playing civilians while maintaining a cover identity that would collapse under even casual scrutiny. Sarah excelled at these challenges in ways that surprised even her. The quiet focus that had sometimes made her seem antisocial in other environments proved to be perfectly suited for operations requiring patience, observation, and independent decision-making. Her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, developed through years of precision shooting, translated directly to success in complex intelligence-gathering scenarios. Martinez demonstrates exceptional operational judgment, read one instructor evaluation that Harrison shared with her during a monthly progress review. She consistently makes correct decisions under pressure and adapts quickly to changing circumstances. Recommended for advanced psychological conditioning protocols. The advanced protocols involved scenarios designed to test mental resilience under conditions that approached genuine torture. Candidates were subjected to sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, and psychological pressure techniques that simulated the methods used by hostile intelligence services. During one particularly difficult session, Sarah found herself strapped to a chair in a room where lights flashed randomly, and recorded sounds created constant audio confusion. The exercise was designed to last 6 hours, with candidates expected to maintain their cover stories despite increasing psychological pressure. Sarah survived the full session without breaking character, drawing on meditation techniques she had learned years earlier during her grandfather's hunting lessons. The ability to maintain mental clarity despite external chaos proved to be one of her strongest attributes, earning recognition from instructors who had seen many elite operators fail similar tests. Most people try to fight the disorientation, explained Dr. Amanda Pierce, the program's chief psychologist, during a debriefing session. You found a way to accept it while maintaining focus on your objectives. That's a rare capability. The shooting components of the training pushed the limits of what Sarah had thought possible. Targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, shots made while under simulated chemical attack, precision work conducted while hanging from ropes or crawling through confined spaces that barely allowed movement. But the most challenging aspects involved what instructors called ethical flexibility, scenarios where traditional rules of engagement didn't apply, and candidates had to make split-second decisions with incomplete information and potentially tragic consequences for any mistake. One exercise placed Sarah in the role of a deep-cover operative who had discovered plans for a terrorist attack, but could only prevent it by taking actions that would compromise her cover and potentially endanger other operations. The scenario had no clear right answer, only a series of difficult choices with unpredictable consequences. The real world doesn't offer perfect solutions, Harrison explained during the debriefing. Our job is to find the best available option under impossible circumstances, then execute that option with complete commitment. As the months progressed, Sarah began to understand that the program was preparing them for missions that existed in the gray areas between conventional military operations and intelligence work. They would operate alone or in very small teams, often in countries where their presence could not be officially acknowledged, facing opponents who recognized no boundaries between military and civilian targets. The psychological toll of this training was significant. Several candidates withdrew from the program, unable to handle the constant stress and ethical ambiguity. Others completed the technical requirements, but were deemed psychologically unsuitable for actual deployment. Sarah not only survived the training but thrived in ways that impressed her instructors. Her evaluation scores consistently ranked in the top 5% of all candidates who had ever participated in the program, and her psychological profiles indicated exceptional resilience under stress. "You have a gift for this work," Colonel Harrison told her during their final evaluation meeting. "The combination of technical skill and psychological stability is rare. I'm recommending you for immediate deployment with Priority Alpha missions." Priority Alpha missions, Sarah learned, represented the highest level of classified operations conducted by the United States military. They involved threats to national security that required responses outside the scope of conventional military action, often in situations where diplomatic solutions had failed and public military intervention was politically impossible. Her first assignment came with a cover story that placed her as a freelance journalist covering regional conflicts in Eastern Europe. The mission briefing involved 3 different intelligence agencies and contained information classified at levels that required additional security clearances. "Your target is a weapons dealer named Viktor Petrov," explained the case officer, a woman whose real name Sarah was never told. "He's been supplying advanced military equipment to terrorist organizations, but he operates from countries where we have no legal jurisdiction and limited diplomatic influence." The mission required Sarah to infiltrate Petrov's organization, gather intelligence about his supply networks, and eliminate him if the opportunity presented itself. She would operate completely alone, with no backup support and no official connection to any government agency. "If something goes wrong," the case officer continued, "you're a freelance journalist who got too close to a dangerous story. We'll make every effort to extract you, but your cover identity is your primary protection." Sarah accepted the assignment without hesitation, though she understood that it represented a level of risk far beyond anything in her previous experience. The months of training had prepared her for this moment, but the transition from simulation to reality was still intimidating. Her departure was arranged through a series of commercial flights that established her journalist cover story. She carried equipment that would support that identity while concealing the specialized gear necessary for her actual mission. Her rifle, custom-modified for this assignment, was hidden in a case designed to look like photography equipment. The flight to Prague gave her time to review her mission materials one final time. Petrov was known to be intelligent, paranoid, and extremely dangerous. His organization had been responsible for supplying weapons used in attacks that killed hundreds of civilians, but he operated with the protection of corrupt government officials and criminal networks that made conventional law enforcement impossible. Sarah's cover identity as freelance journalist Maria Santos was supported by fake credentials that would pass all but the most sophisticated verification attempts. She had spent weeks studying the background and learning to speak with the accent and mannerisms appropriate for someone from Madrid. Prague was cold and gray when she arrived, its ancient beauty shadowed by the kind of political uncertainty that made it attractive to people like Petrov. Sarah checked into a modest hotel near the city center, establishing the routine of a working journalist while beginning surveillance of locations where Petrov was known to conduct business. The first week involved careful observation and intelligence gathering, building a detailed picture of Petrov's security arrangements and daily habits. He was clearly aware that he had enemies, traveling with bodyguards, and varying his schedule in ways designed to prevent predictable patterns. Sarah's breakthrough came when she learned that Petrov regularly attended cultural events, using them as cover for business meetings with potential clients. She purchased tickets to a classical music concert where intelligence suggested he would be present, carefully planning her approach to maximize the chance of making contact without arousing suspicion. The concert hall was elegant and crowded, providing excellent cover for surveillance operations. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe the entire venue while maintaining the appearance of someone genuinely interested in the performance. Her press credentials allowed her to carry photography equipment that concealed observation gear. Petrov arrived exactly as intelligence had predicted, accompanied by 2 bodyguards and a woman who appeared to be either a business associate or personal companion. He was smaller than Sarah had expected, but carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. During the intermission, Sarah approached him under the pretense of being a journalist interested in his legitimate business operations. The conversation was brief, but successful in establishing contact and arranging a follow-up interview at his office later that week. "I'm always interested in speaking with journalists who understand the complexities of international business," Petrov said, his English accented but precise. "Perhaps we can discuss my work in more detail." The interview appointment was exactly the opportunity Sarah needed, but it also represented the most dangerous phase of her mission. Petrov's office would be heavily secured, and any mistake could result in exposure of her real identity and mission. She spent the next 3 days conducting additional surveillance and finalizing her plans. The office building had multiple entry and exit routes, but all were monitored by security cameras and armed personnel. The interview itself would take place in a room where Petrov would have every advantage. Sarah's strategy was to use the interview as an opportunity to plant listening devices while simultaneously assessing the possibility of eliminating Petrov during the meeting itself. The plan required split-second timing and perfect execution under circumstances where any error could be fatal. The morning of the interview, Sarah conducted her final equipment check and reviewed her extraction plans one last time. She carried a concealed weapon appropriate for close-range work, along with the surveillance equipment disguised as journalist tools. Her hands were steady as she approached the office building, but her heart rate was elevated in ways that reminded her of her first sniper training exercises years earlier. The difference was that this was no longer training, and the consequences of failure extended far beyond personal embarrassment or career setbacks. The security checkpoint at the building entrance was thorough but not sophisticated enough to detect her concealed equipment. Sarah's press credentials and professional demeanor allowed her to pass through without raising suspicion, though she noticed that every security guard was armed and alert. Petrov's office was on the 7th floor, accessible only by a private elevator that required special authorization to operate. Sarah was escorted by one of his bodyguards, a large man who remained silent throughout the journey but watched her with obvious suspicion. The office itself was luxuriously appointed but arranged in ways that provided Petrov with clear sight lines to all entrances and strategic advantages in any potential confrontation. He sat behind a large desk positioned to give him maximum control over the space, while chairs for visitors were placed in exposed positions. "Miss Santos," Petrov greeted her with apparent warmth, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. "Please have a seat. I understand you're interested in learning about my import-export business." Sarah activated her recording equipment and began asking questions designed to establish her journalistic credibility while subtly probing for information about his weapons trafficking operations. Petrov answered carefully, revealing nothing of value while projecting an image of legitimate business success. 20 minutes into the interview, Sarah recognized that the direct approach would not yield useful intelligence. She needed to take greater risks to accomplish her mission objectives, even if it meant exposing herself to increased danger. "I've heard rumors that your business extends beyond conventional imports," she said, watching Petrov's reaction carefully. "Some people suggest that you deal in more specialized equipment." Petrov's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his bodyguard shifting position slightly. The question had clearly moved the conversation into dangerous territory, but it was necessary to gather the intelligence that justified her presence there. Rumors are dangerous things, Miss Santos, Petrov replied after a long pause. In my business, it's important to be very careful about what one believes and what one repeats. The subtle threat was clear, but Sarah pressed forward with additional questions designed to confirm intelligence about his supply networks and client base. Each question increased the risk of exposure, but the mission requirements demanded maximum intelligence gathering regardless of personal safety concerns. As the interview concluded, Sarah had succeeded in planting 2 listening devices and confirming several key details about Petrov's operations. But she had also attracted a level of suspicion that would make any future contact extremely dangerous. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Petrov," she said as she gathered her equipment. "I hope we can speak again soon." "Perhaps," Petrov replied, though his tone suggested the opposite. "In my experience, journalists who ask too many questions often find themselves in uncomfortable situations." Sarah left the building with the knowledge that she had successfully completed the intelligence-gathering phase of her mission, but that the window for direct action was rapidly closing. Petrov was now aware of her interest in his illegal operations, and his security measures would be adjusted accordingly. That evening, she transmitted her intelligence findings through encrypted channels while beginning preparations for the elimination phase of her mission. The gathered information confirmed that Petrov was indeed supplying weapons to terrorist organizations and planning additional sales that could result in significant civilian casualties. The decision to proceed with elimination was made at levels far above Sarah's authority, but the execution would be entirely her responsibility. She had perhaps 48 hours before Petrov's suspicions would lead to actions that could compromise her safety and mission success. Sarah spent the night planning an operation that would allow her to eliminate Petrov while maintaining her cover identity and providing a reasonable escape route. The challenge was enormous, but the months of training had prepared her for exactly this type of scenario. As dawn broke over Prague, she began implementing a plan that would test every skill she had developed during her military career. The quiet girl from New Mexico was about to undertake the most dangerous mission of her life, knowing that success would save lives while failure could cost her own. The mission in Prague concluded successfully, though the details remained classified at levels that prevented Sarah from discussing them with anyone outside the most exclusive intelligence circles. When she returned to the United States 6 weeks later, she carried with her the knowledge that her actions had prevented weapons from reaching terrorist organizations planning attacks in 3 different countries. Colonel Harrison debriefed her personally, his satisfaction evident despite the professional tone of their conversation. "Outstanding work, Martinez. The intelligence you gathered led to the disruption of an entire supply network. Your operational judgment under pressure was exactly what we hoped to see." But Sarah's success in Prague was only the beginning. Over the following 2 years, she undertook a series of missions that took her to places that didn't appear on tourist maps, facing opponents whose names would never appear in newspaper headlines. Each assignment pushed her capabilities further, requiring not just technical skills, but the kind of psychological resilience that could only be developed through real-world experience under extreme conditions. There was the extraction of a deep-cover intelligence operative from a hostile country, where Sarah spent 3 weeks infiltrating a criminal organization to create the opportunity for rescue. The mission in Somalia, where she provided overwatch for a humanitarian team operating in territory controlled by warlords who considered international aid workers legitimate targets. The counterterrorism operation in Southeast Asia that required her to eliminate threats while protecting civilian populations in an urban environment where traditional military tactics were impossible. Each mission added to her reputation within the shadowy world of classified operations, though that reputation was known only to a small community of intelligence officers and special operations commanders. To everyone else, Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez remained a relatively anonymous military sniper with an impressive but unremarkable service record. The transformation was evident in more than just her operational capabilities. The quiet uncertainty that had characterized her early military career had been replaced by a calm confidence that came from knowing she could handle whatever challenges presented themselves. She moved through the world with the awareness of someone who had tested herself under conditions that most people couldn't imagine surviving. But The isolation that had begun during sniper training had also intensified. The classified nature of her work meant that she couldn't share her experiences with family or friends, creating a psychological distance that was difficult to bridge during her rare visits home. Her parents were proud, but worried, sensing that their daughter had changed in ways they couldn't understand. "Mija, you seem different," her mother said during Sarah's last visit to New Mexico. "Stronger, but also more alone. Are you happy with this life you've chosen?" It was a difficult question to answer. Sarah was fulfilled by her work in ways that few people ever experienced, knowing that her actions had direct impacts on national security and international stability. But the price of that fulfillment was a life lived largely in solitude, where genuine human connections were complicated by security requirements and the psychological demands of her profession. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was conducting routine training at Fort Bragg. Colonel Harrison's voice on the phone carried an urgency that immediately got her attention. "We have a situation that requires your specific skill set," he said without preamble. "Pack your gear for extended deployment. Transportation will be arranged within 6 hours." The mission briefing took place during the flight to an undisclosed location, conducted by a joint team that included representatives from the Defense Department, CIA, and National Security Council. The gravity of the situation was evident in the seniority of the personnel involved and the classification level of the materials presented. 3 days ago, terrorists seized control of a research facility in Eastern Europe, explained General Patricia Stone, whose reputation in special operations was legendary. The facility contains biological research that could be weaponized if it falls into the wrong hands. Diplomatic efforts have failed, and conventional military intervention could result in the release of dangerous materials. The facility was located in a country that officially maintained friendly relations with the United States, but was known to harbor elements sympathetic to various terrorist organizations. The political situation made any acknowledged American military presence impossible, requiring a response that could be conducted without official acknowledgement or diplomatic complications. The terrorists are holding 12 hostages, including several American researchers, General Stone continued. Intelligence suggests they plan to execute the hostages and destroy the facility within 72 hours if their demands aren't met. Their demands are politically impossible to satisfy. Sarah studied the satellite images and architectural plans of the facility, noting the challenges presented by its remote location and sophisticated security systems. The terrorists had clearly planned their operation carefully, choosing a target that would be extremely difficult to assault using conventional tactics. "Your mission is to infiltrate the facility, neutralize the terrorist threat, and secure the research materials," General Stone explained. "You'll be working with a joint task force, but the precision shooting requirements make your participation essential to mission success." The joint task force consisted of 12 operators drawn from various elite units across different military branches. Sarah recognized several faces from previous assignments, including Captain Elena Kozlov, whose participation had been arranged through NATO intelligence sharing agreements. The team leader was Commander Marcus Webb, a Navy SEAL whose reputation for successful operations in impossible conditions was well established throughout the special operations community. Webb conducted the detailed mission briefing with the kind of methodical precision that came from years of leading high-risk operations. "The facility has 3 main buildings connected by underground tunnels," Webb explained, using 3-dimensional models to illustrate the tactical challenges. "The terrorists have established defensive positions that provide overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. Conventional assault tactics would result in heavy casualties and likely hostage deaths." Sarah's role in the operation was to provide precision overwatch from a position approximately 800 meters from the main facility. Her shots would need to be coordinated with simultaneous actions by other team members, requiring timing precision measured in fractions of seconds. "Martinez, your primary targets are the 2 sniper positions on the main building's roof," Webb continued. "Intelligence indicates they have night vision equipment and automatic weapons. Your shots must be simultaneous and lethal, as any survivor could trigger defensive measures that would endanger the assault teams." The infiltration phase of the mission required the team to cross 15 miles of hostile territory without detection, carrying equipment that included specialized weapons, communications gear, and materials necessary for dealing with potentially hazardous biological agents. Sarah's approach to her shooting position involved a solo journey across terrain that offered minimal cover and was potentially patrolled by hostile forces sympathetic to the terrorists. She would have no backup support and no communication with the main team until the operation began. The night chosen for the assault was cloudy and moonless, providing maximum concealment, but also creating challenging conditions for precision shooting at long range. Sarah reached her position 3 hours before the planned assault time, allowing herself adequate opportunity to study the target area and verify her calculations. The terrorist snipers were positioned exactly as intelligence had predicted, but their alert status and regular movement patterns indicated that they were well-trained and disciplined opponents. Sarah would have only one opportunity for each shot, as any miss or delay would compromise the entire operation. At precisely 0300 hours, Sarah received the signal to commence the operation. Her first shot eliminated the left sniper position exactly as the assault teams began their simultaneous approaches to the facility's main entrances. Her second shot came 1 second later, removing the threat from the right position before any alarm could be raised. The coordination was perfect, with each team member executing their assigned role with precision that reflected months of training and years of experience in similar operations. The assault teams breached the facility's defenses while Sarah continued to provide overwatch, eliminating additional threats as they appeared. But the operation became complicated when intelligence proved incomplete. The terrorists had additional personnel in positions not identified by reconnaissance, and they had rigged explosive devices throughout the facility that could destroy both the research materials and the hostages. Overwatch, this is Alpha Team, crackled Webb's voice in Sarah's earpiece. We have unexpected resistance in Building 2. Multiple hostiles with heavy weapons, requesting immediate suppression. Sarah identified the new threats through her scope, but the shots required were among the most challenging of her career. The targets were partially concealed behind cover that provided protection from most angles, and they were positioned near areas where hostages were being held. Her third shot of the operation required her to fire through a narrow window opening while accounting for wind conditions that had changed since her initial calculations. The bullet traveled nearly 1,000 meters before finding its target, eliminating a terrorist who had been preparing to execute hostages. Outstanding shot. Webb's voice carried relief and admiration. Target neutralized. Continuing advance. The operation continued for another 40 minutes, with Sarah providing precision support for actions that she could observe only through her rifle scope. Each shot had to be perfect, as any mistake could result in civilian casualties or mission failure with international consequences. When the all-clear signal finally came, Sarah had fired 9 shots and achieved 9 confirmed eliminations. The hostages were safe, the research materials were secured, and the terrorist threat had been completely neutralized. The mission was a complete success by any measure. But, as Sarah prepared to withdraw from her position, she received an unexpected communication on her earpiece. Overwatch, this is Control, came a voice she didn't recognize. Outstanding performance. Stand by for priority extraction. The extraction didn't follow standard protocols. Instead of rejoining the main team, Sarah was directed to a separate location where a helicopter waited with markings she didn't recognize. The crew chief who helped her aboard wore no unit insignia, and no explanations were offered during the flight to an airfield that appeared on no public maps. Colonel Harrison was waiting when the helicopter landed, but his usual professional demeanor carried something different, a mixture of pride and concern that Sarah couldn't immediately interpret. "Martinez, walk with me," he said, leading her away from the aircraft toward a nondescript building that housed what appeared to be a high-level debriefing facility. "We need to discuss your future." The conversation that followed was unlike any in Sarah's military career. Harrison explained that her performance in the recent operation had attracted attention at the highest levels of government, including officials whose names were classified and whose existence was officially denied. "There's a program beyond what you've already experienced," Harrison said carefully. "The people involved operate under authorities that transcend normal military command structures. The missions they undertake involve threats to national security that require responses outside the scope of any acknowledged government activity. Sarah listened as he described opportunities that would take her even further into the shadow world of classified operations, working with resources and capabilities that exceeded anything in conventional military service. The work would be more dangerous, the psychological demands more intense, and the isolation more complete. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. Harrison smiled slightly. "Because 3 hours ago, I received a call from someone whose opinion carries significant weight in these matters. They want to meet with you personally to discuss your potential contribution to national security at levels that most military personnel never even know exist." The meeting was scheduled for the following week at a location that Harrison couldn't or wouldn't identify. Sarah would travel undercover documentation that established her as a private security consultant, though the real purpose of the trip remained classified at levels that prevented any details from being shared in advance. As Sarah prepared for this meeting, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet girl who had once practiced shooting in the New Mexico desert had become one of the most capable operators in the most elite levels of military service. Every challenge had revealed new capabilities. Every success had opened doors to greater responsibilities. But she also understood that accepting this new opportunity would mean crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The work Harrison described existed in realms where normal rules didn't apply, and where the consequences of failure extended far beyond personal career considerations. The night before her departure, Sarah called her parents for what might be the last normal conversation they would ever have. She couldn't explain the choices she was facing or the implications of the path she was considering, but she wanted to hear their voices one more time before making a decision that would change everything. "Mija, you sound tired," her mother said with the intuition that only comes from deep love and long familiarity. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah replied, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "I just wanted to tell you that I love you, and that everything I've accomplished has been possible because of the foundation you and Dad gave me." After ending the call, Sarah spent hours walking around Fort Bragg, thinking about the choices that had led her to this moment and the decision that lay ahead. She had proven herself at every level of military service, earning respect and recognition that most soldiers never achieved. But the real question wasn't about her capabilities or achievements. It was about whether she was willing to step completely outside the conventional world, accepting responsibilities and risks that would make everything she had previously experienced seem simple by comparison. As dawn broke over the base, Sarah made her decision. She would attend the meeting and listen to what these mysterious officials had to offer. The girl from New Mexico who had always been underestimated had become someone whose skills were sought by the most powerful people in the government. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it with the same quiet determination that had carried her through every challenge in her remarkable career. The doubters and skeptics had been proven wrong at every step, and Sarah was confident that she could continue exceeding expectations regardless of what the future might hold. The plane waiting to take her to the meeting bore no markings and filed no public flight plan. As Sarah boarded, she carried with her the knowledge that she was about to enter a world that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional military service, where the stakes were higher and the rules were different. But she also carried the confidence that came from years of proving herself under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Whatever these officials wanted from her, whatever new challenges they might present, Sarah Martinez was ready to show them that the quiet professional they had identified was capable of far more than they could possibly imagine. The aircraft lifted off into an uncertain future, carrying Sarah toward a meeting that would determine the next phase of her extraordinary career. Behind her lay a trail of successful missions and exceeded expectations that had transformed a small-town girl into one of the military's most valuable assets. Ahead lay possibilities that she couldn't yet comprehend, opportunities to serve her country at levels where individual actions could influence the course of international events. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Sarah had been preparing for her entire life, even when she hadn't realized that such opportunities existed. As the plane disappeared into the clouds, Sarah prepared herself for whatever revelation awaited at their destination. confident that she possessed the skills and determination necessary to excel in whatever role these powerful officials had in mind for her unique talents.